Hi, it's Dwyer. It's September 8th, 2025. This is the week of the Canelo Terrence Crawford fight. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about styles a little bit. But first, remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, it's truly a tribute to Terrence Crawford, who I think loses this fight. Just wanted to get that out there. But it's a tribute to him that here we are fight week, and we're wondering what strategy he's going to use. In other words, with Crawford, you don't know what you're going to get, right? Is he going to be back foot? Is he going to be front foot? Right? This is the lighter man. He's fighting a heavier guy, much heavier, right? Crawford's fought once at 154. Understand that's a 14-pound gap to 168. If you go to 147, the gap is 21 pounds, right? Let's think it through. So, let's go back through history. Let's look at other greats. Some of these names are some of the biggest names in boxing history. What I'm going to do is to actually put clips, in fact links, to clips from the fights I mentioned, so you could actually look at the fight. Right? What I'll close with here is the strategy I expect Canelo to use. There's a great champion, certainly, in my opinion, one of the best champions I've come across, especially if you consider him a front foot champion, right? Who I feel Canelo can imitate and get the win here in dramatic fashion. Let's talk about these fights. You can disagree with my analysis, my takes on them in the comment section of this YouTube video. Now, folks, there was a time when Henry Armstrong fought the reigning California middleweight champion, a guy who today is not in the International Hall of Fame, but he is in the Ring Magazine Hall of Fame. Ceferino Garcia. Right now, folks, Armstrong, of course, had been the welterweight champ, had been the lightweight champ. He had been the champion in 3 weight classes at the same time, and here he was trying to win at least a share of the middleweight title. You should know that the fight ended in a draw. That's what kept Armstrong from getting at least the California middleweight championship. But I need for folks to think about the fight style. Armstrong, unlike Crawford, was much shorter than Ceferino Garcia. Understand, the men had actually fought before at welterweight. Armstrong won that fight. So here is Armstrong coming up to middleweight to fight a taller guy who, of course, was flashier, believe it or not, than Henry Armstrong. Right? Ceferino Garcia was one of the guys who pioneered the bolo punch in boxing. Now, what you'll notice here is that 5'5.5" Armstrong is really a shorter version of Errol Spence. Right? Armstrong's not on his back foot. Armstrong is not trying to win behind a jab and moving, right? Sticking and moving. No, Armstrong is front foot. He's deep in the pocket. He is what I call a short-range hooker. Right? So he is inside on Ceferino Garcia. There's a lot of grappling. There's Armstrong with a shoulder in the way, and he moves the shoulder just enough to throw a hook. Homicide Hank as he was called, is the aggressor in the fight. Again, the fight was ruled a draw. I don't believe that strategy is possible against Canelo. Right? Because Canelo, I believe, can fight lower than Crawford. Canelo is defensively blessed. Canelo can fight inside. You come in, it's very hard to get underneath Canelo's chin. He knows how to tuck his head. Just understand, too, both Crawford, who hit Yorkis Gamboa with a picture-perfect uppercut, that changed that fight, and Canelo, who hit Billy Joe Saunders with an uppercut that effectively ended Saunders' career, know how to throw uppercuts at guys fighting low. Right? Let me just say, too, the Henry Armstrong, Ceferino Garcia rematch, the original fight is also online. Just Google that. But that second fight is a phone booth fight. Right, folks? The guys aren't looking for each other. They're in front of each other and they're grappling. You should know the 32-year-old Armstrong fought Sugar Ray Robinson when Robinson was in his early 20s. Robinson, of course, more complete fighter, had a back foot. Right? I believe I've seen clips of this fight. I could be wrong. You can't find it on YouTube. It's impossible for me to believe that a fight from the 30s was not filmed. Just understand, this is one of those open legends in boxing. The claim is that Robinson, in his early 20s, carried his idol Henry Armstrong in the fight. Right? While I believe I've seen clips and I cannot find them right here online, these missing fights often do surface eventually on YouTube. Right? We now have most of Jack Johnson, Jim Jeffries, for example. But this fight remains a mystery. Just understand, though, that Ray Robinson solved Henry Armstrong, right? Beat him, and the beating was clear to those in attendance, right? Armstrong's, inside game could be solved. Let me also say, too, Teddy Atlas, excellent trainer. Right? Teddy believes, based on accomplishment, that Armstrong, who again was simultaneously the champion in 3 weight classes when there were only 8 weight classes, is the greatest fighter of all time based on accomplishment. Let me say this too about Errol Spence, and this needs to be said. A fight that I realized I was wrong on early was when I took Mikey Garcia over Errol Spence. I thought there's no way anyone is going to beat Mikey Garcia just trying to be a short-range hooker. In that fight, and it's one of the best performances I've seen in recent years, Errol Spence takes a step back and fights Mikey Garcia off his back foot. Right? Spence got into a major car crash. One wonders what would have happened had Spence come out against Terence Crawford. He may not have been able to. I believe, looking at Spence's punches, his shoulder's not 100%. He also had eye problems. But it would have been interesting had Spence come out against Crawford on his back foot. Right? Just like I believe it would have been interesting if Tyson Fury had come out against Usyk fighting southpaw for at least the first round. Right? Give the other guy something to think about. Spence came out as he usually does, right? You know, lefty short-range hooker got destroyed by Crawford's jab. Right? The problem with being a short-range hooker is that if someone has the timing to hit your jab, and if your head is in a advanced bob and weave head that you can hide, you're going to have problems getting inside, which you need to do to make that style work. Let's talk about another fight, and I believe this fight has inspired many. This fight is the gold standard of a smaller man coming up to fight a bigger man. Right? Ray Robinson is the middleweight champion. He wants to be a song and dance man. This is the 1950s. Let me just say, too, to the historians out there, I'm not sure if America ever had a more flashy part of self-image than the 1950s. Right? I know we look back and it's a bunch of old people and we're like, come on now. But look at an episode of Perry Mason. Right? You're looking at automobiles that have, winged backs. You're looking at Perry wearing, double-breasted suits. There's definitely the, I'm putting on a show component from the 1980s. Only the look in the 50s was, classic. Right? Guys have their hair combed. Think Nat King Cole. Right? Everyone's trying to look flashy. Look at Fats Domino's hair. Right? Think Elvis Presley. Well, understand, in the 50s, one of the kings of the day was Sammy Davis Jr. Right? Believe it or not, the best boxer in the world at the time, Mr. Pound for Pound, wanted that life. He wasn't a big fan of boxing. He didn't like being hit in the head for a living. I'm not kidding. So on his way out the door, Ray Robinson decided he was going to take on an interesting figure in history. A guy who's in the Hall of Fame. Right? The International Hall of Fame. Joey Maxim. Now I need for folks to understand who Joey Maxim was. Right? Maxim beat Jersey Joe Walcott, a heavyweight champion. Right? Not when Walcott was champion, but understand, he beats Walcott on the way up. He beats Floyd Patterson at one point in his career. He beats, if you're into 50s boxing, Bob Satterfield. Right? But I need for folks to understand the difference here. Maxim, the light heavyweight champion. Right? The guy who Archie Moore beat to become light heavyweight champion. Just understand, Maxim is actually more of a boxer than he was a slugger. This is the opposite of Canelo. Right? One of the secrets to Canelo is that Canelo today, forget the past, today is one of the hardest punchers pound for pound in boxing. Joey Maxim wasn't. So, Ray Robinson fights Joey Maxim in New York City, outdoors, a lot of humidity. Right, folks? The link to the highlights is in the description of this video. Robinson comes out, he's fighting another boxer. How does Ray Robinson fight Joey Maxim? He fights him as if Maxim is a middleweight. Right, folks? Let me just say, Ray Robinson had to deal with more fire from the Raging Bull, Jake LaMotta, than he did Joey Maxim. So it's hot, it's humid. The referee is one of the all-time greats, Rudy Goldstein. Rudy, believe it or not, has to be replaced mid-fight because of heat exhaustion. It's that humid. Now, Robinson, in the film, let's talk about his style. Robinson is clearly an athlete, right? Robinson is basically Ray Robinson, only he clinches a little bit more than he normally does. Robinson's doing high-risk moves, right? He's jabbing to Maxim's body. And Maxim, of course, 15 pounds up from middleweight. So Robinson hides his head. He comes in, he throws a few shots, then he clinches Joey Maxim. He's not running away from Joey Maxim. He's winning the fight in part because Robinson, athlete, better athlete, more charismatic, frames his shots better. But then Robinson is overcome by heat exhaustion. Look at the end of the film that I have linked in the description section here. Robinson, in the last round of the fight, it does not go the distance. Robinson is so tired he throws a punch and he falls to the canvas, unhit. Right? He can't stay on his feet. Now what's interesting is when he gets to the corner and the doctor comes over to look at him, right, his corner is trying to revive him. You'll actually notice a guy there with a towel trying to blow wind on Robinson. But Robinson is finished. You'll also notice Joey Maxim has several more rounds left in him. Right? Ray Robinson loses that fight. Understand, that fight creates a challenge to future generations. That challenge is answered by another fighter, another Hall of Famer. Obviously, Ray Robinson's a Hall of Famer, right? Maxim, a Hall of Famer. Bernard Hopkins is on the way out the door, right? He's lost the middleweight championship. He decides, before he leaves, he'll fight for the title at 175 against Antonio Tarver, who, of course, is busy making a Rocky movie. Now, the secret to the fight is that Hopkins was one of the smartest fighters I've ever seen. I believe Hopkins figured out that Antonio Tarver was really more of a boxer puncher than he was a strong light heavyweight. Right? We see him knock out Jones, who wasn't in the pocket rough and tumble. So Hopkins decides that he's going to be episodic. He's going to be the ambush fighter who jumps in the pocket just like Robinson does. Only Hopkins is jumping in the pocket with power shots. After he hits Tarver, he grabs Tarver. He realizes that if a wrestling match breaks out, Hopkins, the guy up from 160, likely has a stronger core at 175 than does Antonio Tarver. Now, if you follow the Tarver story, Tarver actually gains weight and has success later as a cruiser. Right? The Tarver career is an intriguing career. But when you see Tarver, you realize he's more of a boxer than he is a mauler. Right? Tarver has great skills, but they're in punch sequence. Right? Bernard Hopkins figures out that Hopkins is more of a rough and tumble guy than Tarver. So Hopkins moves around the ring, right? You notice Hopkins has the faster foot speed. Let me just make a point here. It'll upset some people. The skeptics on Roy Jones have to be asking themselves why Roy Jones didn't figure out what Bernard Hopkins did, right? Because Jones was a freak athlete. Jones had great legs. But yet Jones wasn't able to stay outside, come inside, and clinch. Right? Being rough and tumble deep in the pocket wasn't Jones's game. It could be Bernard Hopkins's. In the description of this video, I have the fight. Understand, in an earlier video, I said that Crawford needs a 9th round to show us, like Usyk had against Fury, to show us that he belongs in the ring. Crawford needs to show us that he belongs in the ring with Canelo. Hopkins has that. I believe it's the 5th round he actually knocks down Tarver. But understand, the Hopkins-Tarver fight is so lopsided that it's clear Hopkins has won the fight with several rounds to go, unless Tarver puts him down. Right now, maybe this is a pot shot and grab type of fight. Maybe Crawford tries to do that with Canelo. I personally think that Canelo cuts off the ring too well for him to do that. Right? It's a clever fight. What I want people to also do is to look at how Hopkins protects his head. Folks, he's jumping in at angles. He's reading Tarver's stance, and he's figuring out how to jump in such a way that his head's tucked as he throws the punch. Emmanuel Stewart's on the telecast, and he keeps telling you how Hopkins is keeping his head low. Right? Understand what Ray Robinson was unable to do. Go from 160 to 175 on his way out the door and win the title. Hopkins pulls off. Then Hopkins hangs around 175 and actually has a pretty good reign as the light heavyweight champion. Right? Obviously, Hopkins, Hall of Famer. Now let's talk about what I believe Canelo can do. This is the fight I believe Canelo should fight. This is one of the few guys in history who I believe is on par with Canelo in terms of the head movement. Right? A lot of guys can make you miss, move their head back, right, when they're going backward. It takes a different level of skill to dodge punches with your head when you're on the way in. Let me also say, Canelo's best punch is his left hook. Right? This guy's best punch was his left hook. I would argue Canelo's more two-handed than this guy. This guy also had the same problem Canelo has. People looked at him, they didn't think he was that big. He didn't come across as that muscular. Right? But this guy was the ultimate in rough and tumble. This guy also was the ultimate in bring your lunch pail. You're going to need it. I'm going to take you through hell. Right? This guy, in fact, fought faster than Canelo. He gets dropped 2 times in a fight by Oscar Bonavena. Gets off the canvas and, of course, ends up winning the fight. I'm talking about Joe Frazier. This is a fight you need to know because he's fighting another Hall of Famer, a guy who is on the Ring magazine list as one of the hardest punchers in history. Right? He was the light heavyweight champion Bob Foster. And the fight is interesting because Foster's taller than Joe Frazier. Foster looks like the bigger man. If I were to tell you one of these guys is the heavyweight champ, you would think it was Bob Foster. Foster's the guy who knocks out Dick Tiger to end his reign. Right now, folks, Foster also, and this is really curious, tremendous puncher. But somehow Foster has a mobile jab. So understand, here is Bob Foster. He's fighting the reigning heavyweight champion Joe Fraser, Smoking Joe. And Joe Fraser's not having any of it. Joe Fraser, forget the fact that Bob Foster's knocked out a bunch of guys. Joe Fraser didn't feel that Bob Foster was a heavyweight. Joe Fraser felt that he owned the division. Bob Foster was visiting his heavyweight division. So Joe Fraser is coming forward on Bob Foster faster than I believe Canelo will. Right? Canelo's kind of like a slow burn. Joe Fraser was impatient. So you're going to notice Joe is walking forward. Joe is doing his bob and weave. But you'll notice Joe's even more advanced than the bob and weave. Joe has this thing where he has his hand up around his mouth. I'm not kidding. And as the punches are coming, Fraser, who's moving, is able to move while the punch is on the way. And he's able to roll to catch shots on his arm. Right? So let's just say a Hall of Fame puncher. Right? I mean, Bob Foster is to light heavies what George Foreman was to heavies. Right? One of the legendary punchers is being walked down. To Foster's credit, Foster is moving and throwing a jab, and Foster has his hand cocked. Right? Foster is the assassin type. Right? It's nothing personal. If there's an opening, Foster's going to try to land a big shot. Of course, Joe Fraser is the one who lands the big shots. Foster knocked out brutally, early 70s fashion, right? Foster's body looks paralyzed when he hits the canvas. Now, my point here is that Canelo, look at the Danny Jacobs fight. Canelo is defensively blessed. Forget the weight. I'm just telling you, Canelo is defensively blessed. Canelo can get close to you. Canelo is a guy who, like Joe Fraser, has a beautiful left hook that travels. Canelo doesn't have to be right next to you to knock you out. But the key is, Canelo, if he gets close to you and you're not far enough away, he's going to riddle your body with shots. Right? There is a certain type of fighter who I think could give Canelo problems. Right? I do believe Benavidez beats Canelo. I think that's a great fight, though. I also believe, a Thomas Hearns would give Canelo problems, right? But folks need to understand that Hearns hit harder than Terence Crawford. My read on Crawford is that Crawford is more of an accumulation puncher. Right? This isn't the guy who hits you once and it's over. Right? This isn't George Foreman. This isn't Jerry Cooney. I'm not saying Jerry Cooney was better than Terence Crawford. But understand, with Cooney, one shot changed everything. Right? No, Terence Crawford is the kind of guy who hits you with hard shots. They reduce your tank incrementally. This isn't the guy who is going to stop you when you're on a full tank. Canelo is a guy who can stop you when you're on a full tank. right? I think it's a mistake to see Canelo knocking down these young unbeaten fighters, and to think that Canelo somehow has lost punching power, right? People get more efficient as they get older. They don't waste a lot of energy, right? For Canelo in a shootout, and understand, Canelo's that rare slugger who's willing to have shootouts, right? I want people to compare and contrast Nigel Benn, Iran Barkley, right? That's a shootout. By a shootout, I mean nobody's bashful. The fighters somewhere along the line have decided we're going to throw our heaviest artillery. Someone's not going the distance tonight. The Canelo-James Kirkland fight, and I would argue Kirkland hits harder than Terence Crawford. That's a shootout where Kirkland has Canelo in a corner. Canelo doesn't panic. Canelo then has Kirkland with his back up against the ropes. Drops him. Right? We'll call that fight a Joe Fraser type fight. Canelo has had that type of fight. I'm not sure if Crawford has. Right? If Canelo decides, okay, you're up from 154, you've been hanging around Victor Conte and Snack, and you've gained a lot of weight. I don't think gaining weight for one fight is going to give you the wealth of experience that I have at 168. I don't care what your walking around weight is. You and I have lived different lives. The life I have lived involves unifying the title at 168. If Canelo comes in with the Joe Fraser mindset, where he is walking down Terence Crawford, right? He, has the mindset of, my punch is bigger than yours, and I might be better defensively than you are. You're going to have to back up whatever punch you have. You're going to have to back up and shoot a jab like, Bob Foster was shooting a jab against Joe Fraser. Right? If you're going to take my title, you're going to have to knock me down, stagger me, show that you can trade with me and win. Right? Again, look at that Canelo fight. Look at Canelo against Avni Yildirim. It's not quite the shootout that Kirkland is, right? But just understand, Kirkland, southpaw. Has anyone figured this out? Right, folks, Canelo has never been dropped. And that's fighting 168 guys. That's fighting 175 guys. If he shows up and has the attitude that Joe Fraser did, and understand, Fraser's fighting a guy who, pound for pound, I would say, hits harder than Terence Crawford. Right? Bob Foster only had to be right once. Right? And Joe Fraser's attitude is, hey, that once is not going to happen here at heavyweight. Let's trade shots. If Canelo shows up with that attitude and just throws volume, power shots, if Crawford covers up, hits Crawford on his arms, on his body, right? Crawford's going to face a very uphill battle to take the titles. He's going to have to hope that Canelo, who went the distance with Berlanga, went the distance with Jaime Munguia, suddenly is incapable of going the distance. He's going to have to hope that Canelo punches himself out, right? 9 or 10 rounds in, and that he has an opening to finish strong. Let me say, too, that old-timers like Joe Fraser went 15 rounds, right? The Thriller in Manila, understand, Eddie Fudge pulls the plug at the start of the 15th round. That's not a 12-round fight. Right? So if Canelo has trained, and obviously Canelo has had Jaron Ennis with him for a portion of his camp, you could tell Canelo is taking this fight very seriously. It's a legacy fight for him too. Right? If he comes at Crawford the way Joe Frazier came at Bob Foster, if Crawford wins the fight, hey, Crawford will be on the very short list of the absolute best in the sport's history. Right? But understand, I want Canelo to have that Foreman mindset. I want Canelo to have that Joe Frazier mindset. Right? The only mistake Foreman made in the Rumble in the Jungle is when it was clear that Ali was just hanging out by the ropes. Foreman should have stepped to the middle of the ring, waved him on, let the crowd know, look, this man thinks he can take my title by staying away from me. Right? All he had to do is what Jimmy Young did against Ali. Right? Wave to him, say, hey, I'm over here. Come fight me. Right? If Young doesn't stick his head out of the ropes, he probably takes Ali's title that night. Right? If Canelo is backing up Crawford, is throwing hard punches, understand again, the punches don't have to hit Crawford anywhere other than on the arms. If Canelo's throwing big leather, and I believe Canelo's one of the few in boxing who understands this. Right? If you throw big leather and the crowd hears thudding noises, the crowd sees you throwing big punches, the other guy is not gonna take your title unless the other guy finds a way to put you down, finds a way to daze and confuse you. Right? That Joe Frazier Bob Foster classic, right? Fraser gets the knockout, I believe, in the second round. The link to that fight, must watch, is in my favorites folder. Right? If Canelo steps to Crawford and Crawford steps to Canelo, if you get the shootout that you got in the James Kirkland fight, and by the way, Canelo in an interview said Kirkland hit him the hardest of all the guys who've hit him. If you get that level of shootout, I'm sorry, I don't care what the resume is. I just don't see how a guy one fight removed from 147 is going to win that shootout. I just don't. Particularly when Canelo is defensively blessed, right? Canelo has a short neck. He's going to shorten it. Look at the Hopkins Tarver film on how Hopkins is hiding his head as he throws shots. That's what Canelo does intuitively. Right? This isn't Crawford against some free-swinging slugger. No, this is Crawford against the guy who can stand in front of him and protect himself while doling out some of the hardest punches pound for pound in the sport. Right? Canelo hits like Ernie Shavers. Let me say too, one of the problems Canelo has, and it is a problem, is that you can't tell how hard Canelo hits. Right? You're watching a fight and then it just looks like Canelo landed a decent punch and suddenly Edgar Berlanga's on the canvas. Isn't that how it seemed? Right? You see Canelo and he doesn't, it's not the big wind up. He can hurt you badly with short punches. It's almost like an Inoue fight where you're watching it. Inoue comes in, throws a punch about this long, and the other guy is devastated. He's on the canvas. Right? Canelo in my opinion, hits harder than Crawford. Right? I don't think punching power is the kind of thing where I gain weight and suddenly my punching power has extra sting. Maybe Crawford has gained the weight hoping to absorb some of the shots. There's a YouTube video up where Jermell Charlo, after his fight with Canelo, right, just in being asked about this fight, calls Canelo an ox. Right, you can tell Charlo, who's been in shootouts with Brian Castano, a lot of punches thrown in those fights. Right, you can tell that Charlo has some vivid memories of Canelo's power. But yet if you saw the fight, right, Canelo knocks him down, but it doesn't look like Canelo is battering Charlo. It doesn't look like Charlo's holding on for dear life. Right, Charlo, the whole fight, looks in better shape than Ray Robinson at the end of the Maxim fight. That's not how Charlo remembers it. Right, Canelo is vicious with the power even when you have your guard up. Right, so folks, take a look at these fights. Understand, Henry Armstrong, Ray Robinson, Bernard Hopkins, Joe Fraser. Folks, those were great fighters. Those were great fighters, right? I understand fighters want to challenge themselves. I applaud Crawford. I appreciate him greatly for challenging himself after a great career, right? This isn't the Swen Aki who's going to try to retire with an unbeaten record. No, this is the guy who has a stone in his shoe. He has an itch he needs to scratch on his way out the door. So he's taking on one of the best in boxing pound for pound, right? And I give him credit too. No catch weight, no accommodation for him, right? If he's going to beat Canelo, it's going to be on regular terms, right? I give him a lot of credit. But I need for folks to understand, unless he can take Canelo shots and go toe-to-toe with him, like Ray Leonard had to do after his back foot game didn't work against Donnie Lalonde. Granted, that's at a catch weight. That fight was at 168, not 175, even though Lalonde was the light heavyweight champion and his belt was on the line, right? But understand, eventually, Ray Leonard had to go flat-footed against Donnie Lalonde. What people don't realize is that that's one of the absolute best moments of Ray Leonard's career, right? And Ray was so jacked up. Look at the end of that fight. A guy jumps in the ring to hug Ray after Ray gets the stoppage. And Ray is so upset, right? In other words, Donnie Lalonde forced him into a dogfight that Ray pushes the guy away from him. Check it out. It's heavy stuff. Well, that's the rare air that Terence Crawford is trying to fly in. Folks, from this seat, to me, it's going to be uphill. I don't think he can duplicate Henry Armstrong. Maybe he can be episodic like Bernard Hopkins, but let's just say he's not fighting a guy who is, weight drained and stuff like that. Canelo is right for 168. Right? Canelo has meat on the bone. Right? And Canelo hits hard. Canelo, stronger core than Antonio Tarver at 175. Right? I'll say, too, this isn't the Joey Maxim fight. It's not like the heavier guy's a stylist. No, Canelo is coming to drop guys. right? You know, rather than ask, has Canelo lost something? What I want to do is to ask a different question. What's the last fight Canelo has had where he didn't have a guy fighting against him with a snapped bicep, right? Callum Smith goes the distance against him. What other fight has a guy gone the distance recently against Canelo? Tell us about it in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.